Welcome to our week 9 lecture video. In this video, we're going to go over some review questions related to Exit West. But before we get into Exit West, I want to talk about some of our upcoming deadlines here. We are going to have a quiz this week. That quiz is going to be due by 11:59 p.m. on the 18th, so next Sunday. And this quiz is going to be retroactive. It's going to be on Wide Sargasso Sea. If for some reason you didn't watch the Wide Sargasso Sea lecture video in our week 8 module, make sure you check that out because I give you some of the answers to the quiz questions in that video. So definitely important that you check that out. Moving forward for our other deadlines, we're going to have paper number 3 due on July 21st. That is a Wednesday, so different from our normal deadlines. I know we've had a lot of things due on Sundays, but with the semester ending on Friday of next week, so ending on the 23rd, we've got to get everything wrapped up by then. So again, your last paper for the class is going to be due on the 21st, and then the 22nd, 23rd will be when you can take our final exam. So we're wrapping things up next week, and that also means that we're going to have less material in our module next week. So there will be one more lecture on Exit West. We'll also have a lecture video on contemporary artwork and some other things for you, but the main thing next week will be making sure that you've got that paper in and that you can take the final exam. Now, if you have accommodations that you'd like to use on either the quiz or the final exam, make sure you let me know as soon as possible so we can make sure that that's all set up for you. And if you have any other issues with that, please let me know. I know some people are working over the summer. Hopefully you can fit in time to take the exam, maybe in the evening, maybe in the morning, working that out, but let me know if you're having any issues so we can take care of that. So with that, we're going to get into Exit West here. In this video, I'm going to go over chapters 1 through 9, and the rest of the book, again, is going to be covered in week 10. So if you've got up to the end of the story, that's great, but if you're still just starting it at this point when you're watching this, that's okay. In the video, I'm going to break the story down by chapters. So we're going to have different chapters. So let's say you've read chapters 1 through 5, and then you just decide to click on the video. That's okay. I would just say maybe stop the video when we get up through chapter 5, and then continue as you finish with the reading. Now, another thing you can do to take notes is to download the PowerPoint that's in Canvas that relates to this video, and then you can fill in the answers as we go here, or you can try and answer them on your own and then come back for some of the answers here. I'm not going to answer every single question. I'm going to kind of leave them out there for you to try and find some of the answers on your own, and some of the questions have more open-ended answers as well, so I'll kind of give you a little bit of a discussion about some of those, but I'll also let you kind of come up with your own answers. So again, plot review here with some other questions that are a little bit more open-ended so we can see how you're interpreting different parts of the story. And every so often in this video, we're also going to have a section that kind of wraps up what's happening in the chapter so that we can kind of see why the author is doing certain things or why we leave off with certain details. So we're going to go through all that now. So we'll start with chapter 1. And in chapter 1, we open with this quote, "In a city swollen by refugees, but still mostly at peace, or at least not yet openly at war." And this quote's going to kind of set the tone for what's happening in the story, not just when our characters are in their home country, but when they go abroad as well, where they experience people who are kind of trying to live their everyday lives, but also living in fear of something happening. So at the very beginning of the story, their country isn't completely war-torn yet. And so I want you to kind of think about how this quote set the tone for you as you're opening the story, as you're starting the story. What did you think of that quote? Going on here to question 2 and describing the main character's appearances, the author notes that these choices meant something. What do you think their choices of clothing and how they style their hair, how they kind of make themselves appear, how does that signify something about who they are? How are their personalities reflected in their clothing? And we see their appearances change a little bit throughout the story as well, so kind of keep this in mind. Going on to question 3 here, what kind of class do Saeed and Nadia attend? So this is a question that gives us a clue as to about how old Saeed and Nadia are. So they're attending a late night college class, and we know a little bit farther along in the story that they've completed their degrees and then are going on to this kind of secondary education. So they are working towards something like a master's or possibly a second bachelor's degree, each of them. So they're going to be in their early 20s. So they're very young people here. And as they get to know each other, Saeed learns that Nadia doesn't pray. Saeed prays, Nadia doesn't pray. Do you think he's surprised by that? And why do you think he's surprised? So I might kind of think about that in the story, how the characters have been set up. Why might Saeed be surprised by that? Going on to question 5 here, what kind of company does Saeed work for? So Saeed works for a company that does advertising and like outdoor advertising on benches. You can think of billboards, that kind of thing. So a kind of just normal sort of advertising job, nothing too crazy, too out there, something that we might think of if we were to see this in a TV show as, oh, just kind of a humdrum, he's going into the office type of job. So setting up that even though the city has things that are happening about it, people are still trying to go about their jobs. And then we have a jump in the story. So our first jump here to another country, and the first country that's mentioned in the story for us actually is Australia, because the country that Sayid and Nadia are from is not named. So the story jumps to Australia, and there's a man in a woman's closet. And some people, the first time they read this scene, think that maybe the man's a burglar. And if you were thinking he's a burglar, I want you to go back to that scene and think, is that really what's happening? If you've already gotten ahead in the story, you already know what's going to happen here. But what's he doing in the closet there? Is he actually trying to steal anything, or is there something else going on? Going on here to number 8, this is what I want you to think about on your own. What are Sayid's parents like, and what are their occupations? So what background do they have? And maybe that's something that's going to influence Sayid. Going on to 9, what activity does the family do together? They have a telescope, so they stargaze together, and kind of nighttime activity to bond over. So we're seeing a little bit of a clue about what they're like, what their dynamic is like, that they are all enjoying doing this together. And then on to number 10 here. Why does Nadia wear a robe even though she does not pray? So throughout the story, Nadia's clothing is going to come up. We see that she's wearing this to send a certain message and to try and keep people away from her. And she tells this to Sayid in somewhat explicit terms, but basically she wants people to back off of her. So she's wearing this robe in the hopes that she will appear more conservative, so maybe that will get people to leave her alone. And we'll see as we go through the story that maybe not everyone takes away the same message as she hopes they would from her clothing. Going on to chapter 2 here, which school subject did Nadia enjoy as a child? So that's going to be art. And why does the author include this detail? This is more open-ended. Why do you think the author would include this detail in the story? Why tell us about that? Because we don't really have a flashback. We get a couple of details about what her childhood was like, but he just kind of drops that in there. Starts the chapter with her favorite subject was art. So what might that tell us about her, or how does that add to her character development? Going on to question 2, what caused a rift between Nadia and her family? So Nadia is an adult and she wants to move out away from her family, and her family is distressed by this because she's not married yet, and they feel like she should live with them until she's married. They don't like the idea of a single woman living on her own, and so this is going to cause that rift between them, besides that her family is more religious than she is. So there's a couple of layers to this going on there, and Nadia moves out anyway. Going on to question 3, who does Nadia believe she needs to protect herself from? This kind of goes back to the clothing, so I want you to think about that. And 4, where does Nadia work? So Nadia works for an insurance company. Going on to 5 here, what could be challenging about Sayid coming to Nadia's apartment? What is her solution? So I'll leave you to go back to that scene and check on that. Why would it be hard for him to visit her? And then 6, what city does the story jump to? This is on page 29, so I'm going to give you a hint on this one. And 7, what assumptions can we make about what is about to happen at the end of this scene? So I don't want to give too much away here. I want you to go back and kind of think about what could be happening and what our author isn't saying. So why isn't he explicit about what's going to happen in some of these scenes that he sets up? He introduces these unnamed characters, and it's nighttime and something dangerous could be happening, but he doesn't quite tell us. So we'll kind of fill in the blanks there. Going on to 8, who does Nadia lose? Why might this death be mentioned? So Nadia loses a cousin, and her cousin is someone who seems like he was going to be very successful in life. She wasn't that close with him, but this death is the first death mentioned to kind of bring it home to the audience that there is danger in the city, that people close to them are going to start to be affected. And going on to 9, who had Nadia been seeing before she started going out with Sayid? So Nadia had been seeing a musician somewhat casually, and so this is going to be one of our first kind of hints about Nadia being more open about her sexuality than Sayid is. So she had this kind of open relationship. She hadn't been very seriously dating this musician. We get a hint that the musician perhaps liked her more than she liked him, and she breaks that off because she wants to be serious with Sayid. So questions about chapters 1 and 2. 1, why does the author go into detail about Sayid's parents and their courtship and their marriage? That's their dating life and then their marriage. And why do we only learn a little bit about Nadia's parents? And I'm sorry if you hear some noise in the background as I get some emails there. So why do we learn only a little bit about Nadia's parents? So this is something for you to think about kind of on your own here as you go back through the story, or as you keep reading if you're just partway through. And we can think about how these characters develop. We see Sayid living with his parents, whereas we don't see Nadia living with her parents, really. We know that she's moved out. And so we start to kind of become more attached, perhaps, to Sayid's parents because we know more about them and we know less about Nadia's. But why do you think the author chose to do that? Because when we're talking about these characters, we often talk about them as if they're real people. But we want to think about the choices that the author made and how that leads us to these later parts of the story and how the characters are going to develop. And going on to number 2 here, what role does religion seem to play in Saeed and Nadia's lives, and what about in their families' lives? So we've touched on this a little bit, and we'll talk about it a little bit more in our later chapters. But again, if you've only read this far in the story, just think about where you're at so far with those characters and how they feel about these things. All right, we'll go on now to chapter 3. How do Saeed and Nadia differ when it comes to how they use their phones? So we see that Saeed kind of sets a time limit for himself and doesn't have his phone around him all the time. And Nadia just uses her phone when she feels like it. So some of this kind of shows us how they're using technology, what their relationship with technology is like. This is probably something that's pretty relatable for people today, since a lot of people have smartphones, have access to the internet, to their friends, their family all the time through their phones. And I think especially with the last year or so going through COVID, when people had to be separated, or had to be maybe quarantined, or were just trying to stay safe in their homes, that technology was a way to stay in contact. So definitely, again, a relatable thing here to see people wanting to use their phones and then maybe trying to avoid their phones sometimes. There's also a phenomenon people refer to as doom scrolling. Maybe you've heard it called something else, where people just are kind of obsessed with reading bad news, and it's kind of depressing. So it can be healthy as well to put your phone away sometimes. So we're getting that brought up here by our author. And I will note that this story, if you didn't already know, was published in 2017. So the book's been out for a few years now, but there's definitely going to be these bits that are still relatable and still kind of some commentary on our society today. Going on to question 2 here, why does the author mention how the man with the ponytail will be killed in the middle of talking about Nadia obtaining shrooms? So we have a scene where Nadia and Saeed are going to take mushrooms, and they are getting them from this man with a ponytail, and yet we get this bit right before we're going to have this scene about how the man is going to be killed. So our author telling us something that's going to happen, hasn't happened yet. And I want you to kind of think, why would he include that detail? And you might have different answers on that. And going on to number 3 here, why might the author have included the scene where Saeed and Nadia try psychedelics? So what do you think this adds to the story? People have different feelings about recreational drug usage. I'm not here to judge anybody on that. But for Saeed and Nadia, how does this add to their character development? What does this add to maybe their relationship? We can see this as a moment where they're both being vulnerable, where they're both going to take this drug that's going to kind of alter their perception together. And it's kind of similar in a way to how we see people sharing a meal in literature. Oftentimes, if characters are having a meal together, their friends, their family, it's a moment where people are all very kind of peaceful or celebratory together. And this mimics how people are in real life, that if you're having a meal with someone, it's probably someone that you're building a relationship with, or you're in a relationship with, or you're close to, not just maybe some random person. So we have that happening here, that they're going to kind of become closer through this experience. And Saeed doesn't tell his parents about where he's gone. His phone's going to be dying. How do his parents feel about his absence during the night? So we see that his parents are stressed out because their only child has disappeared, it seems, for the night, and really he's going to be okay. But this is a scene that is both showing what's happening in the city, that people are going to be worried that their family members are going missing, but is also still, again, just a relatable scene for anyone who's maybe been out past their curfew and returns home to parents who are concerned. So we have our narrator and our author balancing those things with that scene. Going on here to 5, we've got another jump here in location. So we have an old man who's watching soldiers. Why do you think he's watching them? And we have this quote, the officer didn't have time for the old man, but he had time for his age and for his service record, and so he allowed the old man to linger nearby. So this quote's kind of showing us the respect that the officer has for someone who has been in a similar position before. So we have that happening. And then we have this question for you, number 7. Who does the old man speculate is coming through the city? So this is where we see the older man's prejudices and biases coming through, where he starts speculating about people he sees as foreigners coming through the city. He's wondering if that's who they're leading through here. So that's being projected here. And then 8, why might the author decide to write that the old man does not have anywhere to go? This one's more open-ended. So again, the man is in his home while these other groups of people are being led through the city, and he's just going to stay in his home as it seems that the world is changing around him. So what does that add? And we're not going to come back to this character. This is one of our one-off characters as we jump to another location, but I want you to see later on how you feel this impacts the story. What commentary are we getting from that? Going on to number 9 here, how has the situation in Saeed and Nadia's city changed? So things are becoming more dangerous. The two factions that are fighting are becoming more pronounced. Things are more dangerous for them. Going on to 10, why is it notable that Saeed goes to pray with his father? Why might his mother pray at home? So there's a couple different ways to interpret this. In some religions, men and women don't get to pray in the same room. They go to separate rooms, different parts of whatever kind of religious facility it is to pray. So that could be part of it. It could also be that his mother is feeling somewhat frightened about going out, so she's going to stay at home. So there's different ways to view this scene. Going on to 11, we have this quote, "And the preacher in his sermon urged all the congregants to pray for the righteous to emerge victorious in the war, but carefully refrained from specifying on which side of the conflict he thought the righteous to be." So this is where we see that the preacher is trying to keep up with the message that he's supposed to be putting out there, that of course we want who's ever righteous to be victorious, but he's not saying who that is. So he's trying to be careful so that depending on who in his congregation is with whichever side of the fight isn't going to turn against him. So trying to stay very neutral, even though he's saying he wants the righteous to emerge victorious. So kind of pandering a little bit here to protect himself. So we've got a little bit of, I don't want to call this corruption, but this idea that might make you think back to our Enlightenment readings and what people say versus what they really think about things. Going on to 12 here, how have Saeed and Nadia's work environments changed? So if you think about the workplaces they've been going to, the advertising agency or the insurance company, what's happening in their workplaces, and does this seem realistic to you? And 13, why do Saeed and Nadia have such different opinions about sex? And this is another open-ended question for you to think about. Why are the characters this way, and why might the author have designed them this way? So what is he trying to say through these characters and their exploration of their relationship? We'll go on to chapter 4 now. And again, if you haven't gotten this far yet, you can feel free to pause the video here and come back later. So going on to chapter 4, how does losing cell and internet service impact Saeed and Nadia? How might it affect everyone? So if you've ever been without your cell phone or access to Wi-Fi for a bit, you may have felt a bit cut off from things, wondering what's going on somewhere. Other people like to unplug, maybe go off the grid a little bit. But for Saeed and Nadia, this is going to be somewhat stressful. How are they going to find each other? How are they going to communicate? They live in different parts of the city. How will they meet up again? So again, a stressful thing to be without that, and something that would be affecting everyone in the city, basically. Going on to number 2 here. What does Nadia stockpile? What adds to her fear? And why does she ask Saeed if she has a gun? So Nadia is going to be assaulted in part of the reading here, if you're not sure what that scene was. So Nadia is going to be assaulted while she's at the bank, and that's going to add to her fearfulness, right? She wants to feel safe wherever she goes. And so because her clothing didn't do what she thought it would do, she again had hoped that wearing the robes would make people back off a little bit. That hasn't happened. So she asks Saeed if she has a gun because she's thinking if things increase, if there's more danger in the city now, that they're going to need something else to protect them. So she wants to know if he has a gun. Going on to 3, turn to page 65. So this is where Saeed and Nadia talk about marriage. How do they seem to feel about it? So this is another one for you to kind of interpret how each character is reacting to this scene. We can see that Saeed thinks that they should get married eventually, and Nadia is a bit more hesitant. So what else is going on there? Going on here, what seems to be happening on pages 66 and 67? I'll leave that to you. Going on to question 5, why might Saeed's mother think she saw one of her former students? This is on page 68. So there are now militants who are walking about the city. There's people with weapons, and his mother, who is a teacher, so that's answering one of our questions from a few slides ago. His mother, who's a former teacher, who is a teacher, is wondering if she saw one of her former students. So part of this could be her hoping that she can have a connection to someone, that this person's not going to shoot her if they recognize her. It could just be her imagination kind of willing that to be the case. So this is one of the scenes where the author isn't going to give us the full answer. We don't know for sure. We don't get a confirmation of who this person is. Going on to number 6, what does people vanished in those days suggest? So if you've read ahead, you might know one reason why people are vanishing, but in this section, it's rather ominous. People vanished. Are they running away? Are they disappearing? Are they being kidnapped? We just don't know from that quote. So a little bit of an ominous thing. I want you to think about how you read that line. Going on to 7, what happens to Nadia's family's home? So their home is going to be destroyed. And Nadia, remember, has been living away from them. She's renting a room somewhere. So she's not going to know exactly when that happens. And we don't find out what happened to her family. And we'll kind of come back to that later. Going on to 8, this is talking about a coworker. All agreed he was a fine and delicate man, worryingly so, but these were not times for such men. So what do you think this quote means. What does that indicate about this character? Again, we've got these unnamed kind of side characters to remind us that our author is trying to create a very well-rounded world, that it's not just our two characters, Nadia and Saeed, who exist in this world that's based off of our own world. We have these other characters who maybe, if they are delicate, is someone who is not going to want to be involved in fighting. And where it says, but these were not times for such men, that if the world or if the city is heading into a war, it could be hard for someone to be peaceful or to be a pacifist or to be someone who's not going to engage, because if you're not engaging, you have to find a way out, and that's going to be difficult for people. Going on to number 9, what does Nadia take from her home? Remember, she tries to pick up 3 items, but only takes 2. So she's trying to carry all of these things out, but she's going to take with her 2 laptops. And we might see that come up again later. So she takes 2 laptops. Remember that. Going on to 10, one's relationship to windows now changed in the city. So how has this relationship changed? And how do Saeed and Nadia's homes change in response? So what do you think about this one? We see that if there's bombings happening, if there's shootings happening, that a window is something dangerous to be by. Normally a window is something that lets us see the world around us, lets us see what's outside, can let light in. You can open a window to maybe let some air in. So windows are normally seen as a positive thing. But here we're seeing that the windows are dangerous, that the window could let bad things in. So how are their homes changing in response? Going on to 11, what is the rumor that has started? So this is where we get to the twist in the story. So this story is fiction, and it starts out as realistic fiction, and then it starts to get into fantasy. And you may see it as a little bit of sci-fi too, but we're not going to get an explanation for it. The rumor is about these doors that let people travel to other parts of the world. So a very cool line that our author is working on at this point, that we're between these different genres, that we're moving away from realistic fiction into science fiction or fantasy, but he's not going to give us the answer to it. Going on to 12, what is left unsaid when Saeed invites Nadia to live with his family. It's on page 74. So think about what his conditions would have been before for her to move in, and think of what they're not discussing now. And 13, what was Saeed's mother doing when she was killed? She was just looking for an earring. So a very normal thing, has gone out to her car to look for an earring and is killed. And it's a very abrupt scene in a way to have in the story. It's a little bit startling, but this is showing us again how close to home, like literally at home, the violence has moved to. We'll go on to chapter 5 here. Why do some of the guests at the funeral watch Nadia? So remember, Nadia and Saeed haven't been together that long. If there are other relatives or friends who are close to Saeed and his father, they may wonder, who is this young woman who is in the home? What's her relationship with Saeed like? So we see that even though there's a very serious and sad thing that's happened with the funeral, with the death of his mother, that people are still being judgmental. They're still wondering, who is this person? Going on to 2, why do Nadia and Saeed's father call each other by familial names? So father and daughter. And this is something that may not seem too strange initially, but if you think about a lot of Western cultures, for instance, people will sometimes call a young boy or a young man son. So a man might call a younger man son to be kind of nice, to show some closeness, but not everyone calls someone else daughter. There's also different cultures where people will call someone an aunt or an uncle, even if it's not exactly their aunt or uncle. If it's a family friend that's close, they'll use those terms, but we don't as frequently see someone called daughter. So this is really showing that they've become super close in sharing this household together. And it also kind of foreshadows what Saeed's father hopes for them, that if Saeed and Nadia were to get married, then this would be his daughter-in-law. So we see that closeness being formed because of tragedy and because of hopes for the future. And we also know that Nadia has been estranged from her family. She doesn't know what's happening to them. And so this is kind of a replacement father for her in a way, because the relationship with her father was strained. Going on to 3, how are normal household objects seen differently in the wake of Saeed's mother's passing? So if you go back to this chapter again, think about how Saeed's going to react to objects differently, these things that are going to remind him of his mother. Going on to 4, what are the militants looking for when they invade people's homes? So this is where we see that some of the conflict that's happening is based on religious beliefs and maybe political beliefs as well. But the militants are looking for people of a certain denomination. And so Saeed is passed over because his appearance matches the traditional appearance of one of these factions, but they're looking for people who don't match that. So the neighbor is going to be killed because of this. So we see that there's this religious element to what's happening. Going on to 5, why does Saeed's stance on intimacy change? So I'll leave you to kind of think about that as you go through this chapter. Number 6, how are Saeed and Nadia going to escape the city? So they're going to use one of those magic doors. Going on to 7, why won't Saeed's father go with them? And there's a couple reasons for this. They're on the one hand, he's older, so Saeed's parents were older when they got together, when they had Saeed. So his father is a little bit older and kind of worries that he's going to slow them down, that he could be a burden. And then he also feels that his wife is still in the city. He's buried his wife. That's what was tying him here. He doesn't want to leave her even though she's passed. So there's all these different reasons why Saeed's father isn't going to go on and travel. And that's something that's very hard for them, especially for Saeed, because he's kind of, as he's becoming a grown up, wants to protect his father, wants to kind of switch those roles, and his father's not letting him do that. Going on to 8, what promise does the father ask of Nadia? So he asks Nadia to stay with Saeed until he is safe. So until they're both safe. He doesn't force Nadia into some sort of marriage agreement or anything. He's not putting that pressure on her. He hopes that she'll be the mother of his grandchildren, but he just wants Nadia to stay with Saeed until they're safe. And so for Nadia, that's going to really kind of lock her into staying with Saeed, even if their relationship is going to change, that they're going to be in this partnership to make it somewhere safely. Going on to 6, so chapter 6 here, what personal items does Saeed bring with him to remind him of home? So this is something that you can look up. I'm not going to test you on this question in particular, but what does he bring with him? And this is a question that might make someone think of, if you had to go somewhere, if you had to leave your home, what were the most important things that you would want to take with you? For some people, it might be their phone, because you can use it for communication. You've got pictures stored on there. But if you had other physical objects, what would be important to you for starting over somewhere? And think of how limited you might be for what you could take. So something that would be probably really stressful for people, we have something summarized here, what Saeed would take. Going on to question 2, as our characters go through the doors, why might the author describe going through the door as both like dying and being born? And this is something that's, again, very open-ended. How could it be like dying and being born? We have our characters going through a sort of passageway. There's darkness and then there's light. So there's all these very literal things. But why else might he use this wording? Going on to 3, what type of room do Nadia and Saeed arrive in after going through the door? Where are they? So they go through the doors and they're in a public bathroom at a beach, and they're in Mykonos, which is part of Greece. And we have our characters arriving in a refugee camp. And if you've done the reading, you'll know what the refugee camp looks like. But I want you to also, along with this, when you go into our module, take a look at the 2 links in our week 9 module that will give you tours of refugee camps. One of them is a VR tour. And then the other one is more of a picture tour of different refugee camps in Greece. And I want you to just think about how you would picture a refugee camp before you did the reading, how you imagine it now based on the reading, and then how that compares to the visuals of the refugee tours. So again, those things are in the module. There's the VR tour. I've had students use VR like goggles, headsets to try and do that tour before, but if you're just on your computer, you can do that as well. So check out those tours. Again, we want to be looking here at how do we imagine refugee camps? How close is that to actual reality? And how do they differ? How are they not really all quite the same? Going on to 5, in this group, everyone was foreign, and so in a sense, no one was. And that's on page 106. So here we have a reminder that it's not just people from Nadia and Saeed's country who are coming to this camp. There's other people from other places as well. And so they're all different, but being all from different places is also going to be kind of what brings them together. They're all people who are looking for a new place to live. And so no one's really an outsider. If everyone's new, you're all kind of together. And the next line here, the island was pretty safe, they were told, except for when it was not, which made it like most places. So this is kind of a reminder that there can be just about anywhere places that are safe and places that are maybe not the best to go. And if you think about it, there's different cities in the US that people will think, oh, that city is dangerous. Or if they're from somewhere else, then they hear about that city, they might think it's a bad city. But that there are really good places and bad places everywhere, that it's possible, for theft to happen anywhere or for acts of kindness to happen anywhere. So it's really just like anywhere else. And going on to 7, what items do they buy on the island? So think about what it is that they trade for, that they barter for, and how they think those items are going to help them survive. We'll go on here. So pages 108 and 109, why does the author describe our protagonist climbing the hill this way? And this scene can be a little bit confusing for people. So there's a hill that Saeed and Nadia are going to climb, but they're not climbing it at the same time. They've gone to the top of this hill at different points in the day. They're not standing there next to each other. They're just ending up close to the spot where each of them had stood before. So why describe it that way? And I want you to think about what that's adding to our character development. It's a little bit of a telling or foreshadowing scene. Going on to 9, how are Saeed and Nadia betrayed? So someone Saeed had known from their home city was supposed to help them, and that person betrayed them. He's not going to help them move on anywhere or get anything. And so we're seeing here how Saeed wants to trust someone that he's known before. He wants to trust people from their home city, and it's not always going to be the case that they are actually trustworthy, but we see him wanting to believe the best in people. Number 10 here, Saeed asks Nadia why she still wears her robes. What is her response? So think about how they're still making certain choices about their clothing. And then 11 here, who does Nadia briefly befriend before leaving Mykonos? So there's a young kind of volunteer nurse who Nadia is going to befriend briefly before they leave. And this is where we see the other side of having different feelings about people from other places. So where Saeed wants to trust someone from home, Nadia is open to making friendships with people who are brand new, who have had a different experience than her. She doesn't see that different background as being a reason to not trust somebody or not befriend them. We'll go on to chapter 7 here. What type of room do Saeed and Nadia emerge in when they go through the second door? So now they end up in a bedroom. Number 2, why do Saeed and Nadia claim a particular bedroom for themselves? So why do you think they chose this room? Why is this going to be kind of their camp in this house? Going on to 3, why do Saeed and Nadia become angry with each other when they have a chance to shower? People often have different answers for this one, so it's okay if you read it a different way than somebody else did or what I'm going to say here. But one thing to note is, again, how much Nadia has wanted to keep her robe on until this point to kind of be this protection from the world, and how Saeed has kind of wondered about that, has kind of wondered if it maybe is not just a guard against other people, but also against him, because she so often has it on and only occasionally has taken the robe off in front of him. So now when they're at the house and they get a chance to bathe, Nadia, of course, is going to have to take her clothes off to bathe. She takes a nice shower and she comes out with a towel. And so she's in this new place, and yet she's very vulnerable. And Saeed is kind of uncomfortable with this, possibly because she's been so kind of protective before. And then also because he sees this as a stranger's house. It's someone else's house, and she's very comfortable in it. So he's unnerved by those things. On Nadia's part, being able to shower is something that makes her feel human again, that she can be clean, that she can kind of wash off the layers of travel and stress and everything. So she's not going to be happy that Saeed's kind of judging her for that, for being comfortable. So they're kind of at odds on this part. But again, if you read this differently, that's okay. But why do you think they would be angry at each other in that scene where they're having a little bit of a spat? Going on to 4, where are Saeed and Nadia now? So they're in London. And 5, how does a door in Kentish Town save an accountant? So there's an accountant who was contemplating taking his own life, and a door appears in his flat, and so he's going to go through that door and start a new life. So we're seeing these doors as being a source of opportunity, of possibility for people. So Saeed and Nadia left a country that was falling into a civil war and are trying to find safety. For this accountant, he's had what some people might think of as a comfortable life of being able to have money as an accountant, and yet he's not happy with his life, and this door is going to let him find a means of escape without hurting himself, so he can go through this door and start over and start anew. So there's this renewal that's happening with the doors. Going on to 6, how do Saeed and Nadia feel about life in the house? Who is more comfortable or uncomfortable, and why might this be? So I'm going to leave that to you. Why do you think one would be more uncomfortable than the other one? On number 7 here, why is it notable that Saeed is the only person in the house who is against stealing items from the house? And why does Nadia scold him for taking this stance? So for Nadia's part, we can see that she is maybe in more of a survival mode, that if they need to take something, she'll do that. And Saeed is still trying to follow the morals of their home, right? In most places, stealing is wrong. And Saeed, even though he's in a new place here, even though he's living in someone else's house, he doesn't want to steal. He only wants the shelter. He doesn't want to take more than he has to. So they've got very different stances on this. And I want you to think of why that might be and why our author might have them be opposed in this. Why not have them both agree on it? Going on to number 8 here, what does the author mean when he describes the trading of food and promises of food as barter not so much of different goods exactly, but of time? So people really need this food to survive. They, of course, need to have a meal. And so when people trade food away, when they give food away, they're giving someone else more time. They're giving that person a means for survival for a little bit longer, and maybe sacrificing a little bit of their own time until they can get something else. They're kind of putting themselves at risk there. And so we'll see people trading for different things depending on what they feel is important. So it's not just food. It's again, literally having a more comfortable life, or having life itself for a little bit longer with that. Going on to 9, how are Saeed and Nadia injured? I want you to go back to that section if you're not sure. And what promise do they make to each other? So they promise to be less shitty to each other is what they come up with basically here. So they're going to be kinder to each other after this. It's going to bring them together a little bit more, going through this trauma, going through injury together. All right, so some follow-up questions for chapters 3 through 7. So we'll take a little pause here to go over these. How are Saeed and Nadia developing as characters? So how have we seen them grow or change from the start of the story to where we're at now? An obvious one is that they're traveling together, that they went from being classmates to being a couple. But what else do you see happening? Number 2, why does Nadia not reconcile with her family? And this one has a couple levels to it. We can see very literally that she didn't know when their house was destroyed. She comes back to it later and sees that it's gone. She doesn't know where her family has gone to. And so we have that very literal reason. But as far as this as a story, as something that our author has to write, why might he have decided not to have her get a call from them or have a message from them about their state? So what is that doing to the story, and how is that adding to our character's development? Going on to 3, why are Saeed's parents never named? So we spent a bit of time basically with Saeed's parents learning about their courtship, their marriage, what their life is like with Saeed. We see that his mother has passed and his father's been left at home. So why not name them? For some people, this could be so that we don't become more attached to those characters. If they had names, then their losses might be felt more strongly. But it's also reminding us that there are so many people who are lost when there's a civil war, that to other people, to anyone else, would be nameless, but these people still had families who cared for them and who are mourning. So we've got those different layers to that here. And going on to 4, why is their home country never named? So why is the place that they're from not named? This is something to think about at different points in the story. On one level, it makes it easier for our author to kind of distance himself from the real world, because he's not picking on any one country. He's not having to predict that any certain country in the world is going to be at war. He's not blaming anyone for having a war. And on the other hand, it's also putting some weight on the reader, because you as a reader might think of different places in the world that have had civil wars or who have had different kinds of fighting going on. I've had some students over the years match up parts of the story to things that are going on in places that they've lived or places that their family has lived before. So there's some familiarity to the story, and it also again is providing that distance, that our author is not trying to blame any countries that have been at war, but kind of also saying that any country could have a civil war. So we're seeing that here. All right, going on to chapter 8. What is happening to the electricity? So the power is being cut to parts of London. We've got Dark London as this area where there's more and more of these refugees. And so someone is cutting the power to them to make it harder for them to live there, to maybe force them out. Going on to 2, what is the council? Who is on the council? So the council is this group of what might be thought of as elders who are in the house that Saeed and Nadia are living in. And they initially think that these people are all from Nigeria. And then as Nadia spends time with them, she starts to realize that they're people from other parts of different countries as well. And so Nadia starts attending these council meetings, and one of the older women lets her join them and listen and observe. And this is going to give Nadia a bit of a reputation at the house. So people will respect her, because even though she's young, she's sitting in on these meetings. So she's becoming part of this new community and learning how things are done. And with this, we also see it just a desire to establish order, that whenever there's a group of people or a large group of people, eventually it's necessary to have some sort of governing body or some sort of group that kind of takes care of things, maybe sets down rules or regulations or figures out what problems need to be solved. So we have that happening on a small scale within this house. And if you're kind of wondering about the size of the house, it's going to be a very large house for all these different people to be in there. So you could think of it more closely to an apartment type of building. Going on to 4, why is Saeed uncomfortable in their house? So while Nadia is open to meeting people from other countries, Saeed wants to be with more people from his home country. He wants that familiarity. And so being the only young man from their country in this house makes him feel like an outsider. We'll go on to our next set of questions for this chapter here. What is appealing about the house Saeed wants to move to? So he wants to move to a house that's made up of people who are all from their home country. So they're going to speak the same language, maybe have the same beliefs, be familiar with the same cultural references. So he wants that comfort. Number 6, what is the drawback of this other house? So the drawback would be, well, first they've got to move, they've got to change where they've been living, but mainly that they have to sleep separately. So even though there are couples in this new house, they're not sharing rooms the same way Saeed and Nadia have been. They're separating the men and the women. And so for Nadia, that's not going to make her feel secure. She doesn't want to be separated from Saeed. So this becomes a point of tension. Number 7, who gives Saeed a pistol? And how does Saeed feel about carrying a weapon? So one of the men from that house that they're invited to gives Saeed a pistol so he can defend himself. And Saeed doesn't really feel good about carrying a weapon, doesn't feel comfortable about having that. But we see that Nadia doesn't say anything about it. So even though they're not supposed to have guns in their house, she's okay with it. She wants to have that protection. So we see them again kind of at odds on this. And 8, what does Nadia see online? So Nadia is scrolling and she sees a picture of someone who looks like her, that it could have been her sitting somewhere. So this is going to be a bit of a kind of a meta moment to see herself. And she's, of course, a character in our story, but seeing that picture of her kind of makes her a character in someone else's online story. When we think of photography, we, of course, see the person who's in the picture, but we're kind of seeing the person through the eyes of the photographer. The photographer gets to choose the angle and work on the lighting and kind of craft their own image of this person. So Nadia is kind of losing part of herself in this scene, or maybe worried about losing part of herself in this scene. Going on here, what rumors are spreading in London? One of them is about a cinema. It's a movie theater. So there are acts of violence happening against the refugees, and a theater is going to catch fire. Number 10, how do these events affect people? So there's been some animosity between some of the people in London and the refugees who are coming in, and there's also people who are sympathetic to the refugees. And a terrible event like this fire is going to make people kind of rethink some of their prejudices and some of the violence that's happening, and realize that things have gone much too far, that they're making the wrong choices, and they're going to have to think about how they're going to help the refugees instead of all of this leading to unnecessary violence. Going on to 11, how does Sayid try to reassure Nadia when she asks him questions about death? So this is where we have another reference to technology, kind of a thought about is death kind of like a phone turning off or a screen turning off? And Sayid tries to tell her that death might be like sleeping, just like going to sleep and then you have a little dream right before. So he's trying to comfort her here. This is one of the scenes where we see Sayid trying to reach out to her, trying to say, well, it would be like sleep, it would be peaceful, because again, they've both lost people close to them in violent deaths, and Nadia isn't always very vulnerable about those scenes. She doesn't always open up. So here we have her opening up with that fear, and Sayid trying to use this moment to become closer with her through that talk. And getting into our last chapter for our reading for this week, just talking about chapter 9. Again, if you read ahead, if you finished the novel already, that's great. If you're waiting to go over the rest of the notes, though, we'll continue with chapter 10 next week. We'll finish 10, 11, 12. But in chapter 9 here, where in London does the couple move to next? So they're going to move to this camp space. So it's another territory that's set up for refugees to make kind of temporary housing, or little kind of sheds, huts to live in. So not that great of a living condition, not the same as the house, but at least a community where they're going to be more protected. So this is where they're going to move to. And if you haven't been to London, if you're not too familiar, it could be kind of confusing to think about there being space for this, but this is in a way kind of comparable to Detroit. If you think of there being downtown Detroit, we can think of our sports arenas and businesses and restaurants and all that stuff. But then we have suburbs around Detroit, and there's Metro Detroit, which is a much larger area. So London is kind of similar in that way, that there's London, but then there are more neighborhoods and boroughs and things that spread out from it. So there's still room for people to build things and to have this housing. So they're going to go there, and if they contribute to helping some of these buildings be put up, then they will get to live in one eventually. So they're there for a little bit. Going on to 3, what do Sayid and Nadia dream about? I'm going to leave that for you to go back and look at. And then 4, how do they react to learning Sayid's father has died? So they're, of course, both heartbroken about this. Of course, Sayid's going to feel it harder. It's his own father. And Nadia is going to want to comfort Sayid and pray with him. And he's kind of saying that's not necessary for her to do because he knows she doesn't believe in the same things as him. But it's really kind of cutting a tie with their home in a way, and also going to make Sayid miss home that much more because of it. So they've lost one of their relatives, or for Sayid, his relative. So again, it's going to hit them very hard. This was someone back home who was still alive that kind of kept that thread going, and now they're kind of more alone in the world in a way. So a very serious scene here to end chapter 9. A little bit more chapter 9 here. We've got something happening in Amsterdam that kind of brings us up a little bit, that we have 2 elderly men who meet each other because of the doors and start a relationship. So this is where we see another thing that the doors can do, that the doors can bring people together, that they're not necessarily for escaping a war or escaping a different situation, that they can just be a way to meet other people that wouldn't have been able to meet before. Going on to 6, what does Sayid think of his foreman? So this would be his supervisor on the project. And Sayid is going to look up to this guy. We can see that Sayid, having lost his father, wants to have kind of another older role model in his life. And the foreman kind of gives him that strength too. Going on to 7, what is Sayid's impression of the light-skinned family he helps place in the camp? So for Sayid, he may have had an idea in his mind of what countries people were fleeing. And so when he sees someone or a family with light skin, so someone he may think is from a European country who is fleeing or trying to go somewhere, it could kind of broaden his idea of what types of things are happening in different parts of the world, that anybody can be a refugee, that anybody can be replaced. That's not just someone from his own country or from Nigeria or from those other countries that have been mentioned so far. Going on to 8, how do Saeed and Nadia feel about each other's appearances? So, because they have been eating differently, because they've been working very hard, their appearances are starting to change a little bit. And so, we get some commentary on that, and you can kind of infer things through that description. And then, number 9 here, wrapping up the chapter, where does Nadia suggest they travel to next? So, she's going to suggest they travel to Marin, which is kind of near San Francisco. So, they're going to go to California in the United States on their next jump. They figured out a way to go there through the next set of doors. So, that's where we're going to wrap up our reading. Again, if you've already finished the novel, that's great. If you want to wait for some notes to follow along with, we're going to pick that up next week. Besides our lecture video next week, I'm also going to have another PowerPoint I'll share with you that has a breakdown of the different chapters. So just kind of an overview of the reading here, since this is our last reading for the semester. If you have any questions, comments about anything, please let me know. We're getting to the very end of things here, so I really want to know if you're having trouble with anything so we can finish the semester strong. Again, our paper is going to be due next Wednesday, so that's coming up in a week or so here. So make sure that you're working on that last paper. If you have questions on the paper, feel free to email me or message me and we can set up a meeting. A few of you have met with me over Zoom to kind of talk things through. You can also send me a rough draft ahead of time. We can talk about that, but let's make sure that we wrap up on a strong note there. And then we also have some extra credit coming up here. Make sure that you're working on that extra credit this week if you want to have that for the exam, because we're going to be finishing up next week. We can't do the extra credit after the exam. We got to do the extra credit before. So if you've been looking for some extra credit, make sure that you take advantage of that. That's going to be in Canvas like everything else. So again, make sure you're referring to our modules. With that, I'll wrap it up. I hope you have a good rest of your week. Don't forget to take that quiz. And again, have a good one.